You miss me? I know. Welcome to my channel. To all the returning subscribers, thank you for subscribing, and for those stopping for the first time, please do well to subscribe, turn on the notification bell icons. When I release a content like this, you will be the first to be notified. So we are making a kimono and a short. We folded our fabric into 4, so this is the open end of this fabric, and we are using a 4 yards for this project. So we are going to go ahead and pin this fabric because it's a stretchy crepe and silky, so that's the reason why the chalk was not properly showing. I'm really sorry about that. So we go ahead and mark our starting point. From the shoulder down to our bust is 13 inches, and we're going to mark it at that point. We'll go ahead from the shoulder down to the waist, which is 20 inches. So we're going to mark the 20 inches at that point. Make sure you use your customer or your own measurements for this project. So we'll go ahead and use our ruler to mark a straight line across the bust point. We're just going to rule that down. We'll do the same also. We're going to rule a straight line across also for the waistline. Once we are done with that, we are just going to go ahead and just mark our shoulder line. We're just going to mark that shoulder line at that point there. Okay, so once we're done marking our shoulder line, we'll just take our tape rule from the shoulder point. We'll take our tape rule from the shoulder point. We are just going to mark the full length of this kimono, and the full length of this kimono is 65 inches. So we're just going to mark it to the very length of this fabric. So once we're done, we're going to be imputing our shoulder measurement. So our shoulder is 7.5. We're just going to do shoulder divided by 2, and we're going to mark it at that point. Then we're going to mark our sleeve measurement. So our sleeve measurement at that point is 15 inches. So we're just going to mark that 15 inches at that point there. And once we're done with that, we are going to go ahead and also mark a 1.5 inch for the folding of the sleeve. So it's a cut together sleeve. That's the kimono. Okay, so once we're done, we're just going to mark that at that point. So we're just going to arrange the fabric. Okay, so once we're done doing that, we'll go ahead and put our bust measurement divided by 4. So we're going to mark the measurement at that point. Once we do that, we're going to add a 4 inches allowance just to make the kimono to be free. So we're adding a 4 inches allowance to the body. We are going to do the same thing to the waist. We are going to divide our waist by 4 inches. Once we've done that, we're just going to mark our waist measurement at that point there. So whatever your waist measurement is, you just impute it there. We're also going to add a 4 inches allowance just to make it free at the waist. So once we're done with that, we're going to mark that at that point. So once we're done marking that, we'll just take our fabric. Okay, we're just going to move the fabric a little bit upwards so we can see the full length of this kimono. Okay, so that's the full length of the kimono. We are just going to mark our hip measurement. Once we have on our hip, we're going to mark that at that point. So we'll mark our hip measurement divided by 4, and then we're just going to add a 4 inches allowance at that point. So we didn't mark our hip, so I'll just go ahead and bring this down. We're just going to measure from the shoulder down to the hip measurement, which is around 20. We're just going to be using 27 inches. So we're just going to mark it at that point there, and we're going to mark our hip measurement divided by 4. We're going to mark it at that point and add our 4 inches allowance for the kimono. So once we are done, we'll just be adding a 1/2 inch around the bust to the waist to the hip, and then to down. We're just going to add 1/2 inch for joining. Once we are done adding the 1/2 inch for the joining, we're just going to shape the fabric a little bit so that we can work on the sleeve. So we are going to go ahead for the sleeve opening. We're going to mark sleeve opening to be 12 inches. So we're just going to mark 12 inches. I'm sorry the camera could not capture that. So we just marked 12 inches at that point from the shoulder down to the sleeve opening at the underarm. So once we have marked that, we're just going to go ahead now and straighten the fabric. Then we're just going to go ahead and join the lines, making the curve, just a small curve. We'll just make that curve to the opening of the sleeve. So once we're done with that, we'll do the same. We'll just mark that curve down to the end of the kimono. So once we're done doing that, we're just going to go ahead and mark our neckline. So our neck width is 4 inches. We're also going to mark the back neck, which is 1.5 inches. So we're just going to make a curve at that point there. For the both side, remember we are cutting the both side, we're cutting both the front and the back. So we're just going to mark the front neck first, the back neck, sorry, we're going to mark the back neck first. So once we're done with that, we're just going to take our shoulder slope. We're using a 2 inches shoulder slope from the shoulder, so we'll mark 2 inches at that point, and then we're just going to connect it down to the neckline. Okay, so once we're done ruling that line, connecting it to the neckline, what we're going to do is we're just going to check how many inches we have left. So we'll be left with 10 inches for the sleeve opening. So we're just going to confirm that we have 10 inches for the sleeve opening. Okay, so once we have that 10 inches, we're just going to add a 1 inches just for the joining of the side of the armhole, and then for joining of the shoulder, just we're adding just the 1 inch, and then we'll just recurve our line at that point there. So once we're done with that, we're just going to pin the fabric down so that it doesn't shift while we are cutting it. So once we're done with that, we'll just go ahead and then cut out. We'll start cutting from the neck. We'll just go ahead and cut the neck and then through the shoulders. And once we're done cutting, this is what our kimono looks like. So we'll just go ahead, after cutting, we'll just go ahead and then unpin the kimono, and then we're going to separate the front from the back so we can be able to cut the front neckline and the opening for the front. Okay, so once we are done with that, we're just going to fold the front back, and we're just going to pin it down so that it will not shift. So we're just going to pin it. Once we're done pinning it, we'll go ahead and mark 1.5 inch from the neckline there. We're just going to mark 1.5 for the opening. So we'll mark the 1.5 from the neck down to the hem of the kimono. So once we're done marking that, we'll just use a ruler and connect those lines down. And after that, once we're done with that, we're just going to go ahead and then connecting from the shoulder, from the width of the neck, we're just going to go ahead and then curve our line from that neck, the shoulder point. We're just going to connect it so that it will just we're just going to curve it smoothly at that point from the neck, from the shoulder to that 1.5 inches that we mark. So once we're done doing that, our kimono is almost ready. We'll just go ahead and then cut that opening for the kimono up. So once we're done, We'll cut a 2.5 inches long strip which we'll use to sew around the top. We'll go ahead and cut the shorts for this kimono. So we'll be starting from the bottom of the shorts up to the waist. So our short is 23 inches, the length of the shorts, and we'll add a 1 inch allowance for the folding. So from the waist to the hip, we're just going to mark at that point 8 inches. So we're just going to be minusing a 1.5 from the waist. So we're going to mark 2 inches for the crotch line from the hip. So at that point, we're just going to mark a horizontal line at that hip measurement. And once we're done with that, we're going to go ahead and mark our crotch line across horizontally also. Okay, so once we're done with that, once we're done marking that line, we'll go ahead and minus 1 inch from the waist point at that point. So once we minus it, we'll then go ahead and divide our waist circumference. We'll divide our waist circumference by 4, and we'll mark it from that 1 inch at that point. We're just going to mark our waist divided by 4 at that point. So we'll also go ahead at the hip. We're just going to divide our hip by 4 inches. By 4, and once we divide it, we're just going to mark our hip circumference at that point. We go ahead and divide our thigh measurement by 2 at the crotch at that point. When we divide it by 2, we'll mark our thigh measurement at that point. We are going to go ahead also and add 1/2 inch for the sewing allowance. We'll also go ahead and then mark our knee circumference, because that is where the shorts will be stopping. So we'll divide our knee by 2 and then we'll mark it at that point. So once we're done marking it, we'll connect the waist to the hip line from that 1 inch. We're just going to connect it, and then we'll go ahead to connect the crotch. We're just going to connect from the crotch down to the knee. So we're just going to rule a straight line at that point. Once we're done with that, we're also going to go ahead and curve our crotch line. So we're just going to mark from the waist and then curve it at that crotch. We're just going to curve it slightly. If you have a French curve, you can use that as well. I'm using a free hand, so I've done that. And once I'm done with that, I'm just going to pin it to secure it, and then we'll go ahead and cut it. If you're watching up to this point, please go ahead and subscribe if you've not subscribed, and hit the notification bell icon. Please share this video and like it. Thank you so much. Okay, so once we are done cutting this, we're just going to set it apart so we can go ahead and work on the back panel. We're just going to open up this front on the side where it's closed, and once we're done, we're just going to set it aside for the back panel. So we'll go ahead and then we're going to place the front panel on the folded fabric. So we want to cut out the back. We're just going to place our front on the folded fabric. We're going to make sure at the crotch area that we have up to 4 inches. This is to allow us to be able to curve our crotch depth at the back panel. From the waist at the back, we'll go ahead and mark 2 inches from that waist. So we're going to mark the 2 inches down to the hip line. So once we get to the hip line, we are just going to stop at that point, and we're going to mark from that crotch line to 2 inches. We're just going to mark it at that point. We'll go down also from the crotch line downward. We'll mark 2 inches. So from that point, we're just going to mark a 1.5. This is for allowance, for the back allowance. So we'll mark our 1.5 inches down to the hem of the shorts. So once we are done with that, we are just going to cut the back panel. We're just going to trace that line and cut it at that point. Once we're done cutting that, so if you watch, we did not cut the 2 inches we marked at that crotch. We're just going to fold it at that point because we want to get the midpoint at that back where it meets the front crotch. So we just fold it and lap it at 1/2 inches. So at that point where it meets the front crotch line, we're just going to use our chalk to mark that point at the back of the short. So we're just go to the back panel, we just mark it at that point. Then we'll go ahead and use our tape rule. So it is actually, if you mark the point correctly, you see that it is actually slanty. The camera did not get to that again. I'm really sorry about that. So once you mark it at that point, you just use a tape rule and measure 3.5 inches, giving it a slanty line. So we're just going to connect that back crotch to that point where we marked at the back panel. We'll connect it and then we'll just connect it also down to the knee, and then we'll cut it off. We'll just cut the excess part off. So this is the front and back panel of our short. We're just going to keep that aside since we're done with the cutting, and we're just going to go ahead and start our sewing. So we're just going to be joining the shoulder to the shoulder, the front and the back shoulder for the kimono. We are just sewing with a 1/2 inch allowance. So we're just going to join the first shoulder. We'll do the same too for the second shoulder. Once we are done with that, we'll go ahead and join the side from the sleeve, from the armhole curve there. We're just going to join the side with 1/2 inch allowance. So we'll be joining it down to the hem of the kimono. We'll do this for the other side too. So once we're done with that, we'll just go ahead and measure the opening for the front of the kimono where we'll be adding our strip. So we'll just measure it round, and once we've gotten how many inches, we're just going to cut that out at 2.5 inches. So we're just folding it and sewing it down. So once we're done sewing it down, we're just going to attach it to the kimono round, sewing it with a 1/2 inches. Okay, so once we're done sewing that to the kimono, ahead and fold the sleeve, and then we're also going to fold the hemline, and our kimono is ready. We'll go ahead and join the short. So at the front, we're just going to sew 1/2 inch on the crotch line there. So once we're done with that, we'll go ahead and also sew the crotch for the back. So we're putting our zip at the back, so we'll be sewing 1 inch at the back for the crotch. So once we're done with that, we're just going to face the front and the back. We're going to open it and then we'll match the crotch at that point, and then we're just going to secure it with a pin. So then we're just going to sew 1/2 inch from the hem of the short down to the other side of the hem of the short, making sure that that point where we pinned is not going to shift, so that we have the line meeting each other at that crotch there. So once we're done with that, we'll just go ahead and join the sides. Remember, we left 1/2 inch for the side allowance, so we'll go ahead and join 1/2 inch allowance for the side, and our short is almost ready. We'll do the same thing for the other side also. We sew a 1/2 inch. Once we're done, we're just going to cut our band to our waist measurements, and we're just going to fix that to the shorts, and we'll go ahead and add our zipper to it, and then we're just going to fold the hem of the shorts, and that is the end of this tutorial. Thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe.